So last weekend, I had some opportunity to take some time away and visit some classmates of mine from seminary in Rome. And we loved traveling together because we had a fair amount of opportunity to travel during our time in seminary together. We had the opportunity to travel all over Italy, much of Europe, the Holy Land. And because we weren't allowed to go home, at least for summers, for the first 2 years of our time there, we had to spend a lot of the holidays together as well. And one particular place I like to go for Christmas break was to England, so I could once again go to Mass in English, or at least something similar to English at least. Like what is often said about our brothers and sisters who live in the Isles, we are two people separated by a common language. And if you ever have the opportunity to go to England, one of the most popular stops to visit, especially if you love World War II history, is Coventry. Coventry was an industrial town of about 320,000 people during World War II, and because it had as many factories as it did, it was often targeted for bombing attacks by the German Luftwaffe. But on November 14th, 1940, it was targeted for an especially vicious attack. Air raids in World War II used to last a number of minutes. However, this one lasted for a number of hours, as more than 500 German bombers dropped, among other things, 36,000 incendiary bombs, setting fire to the entire city. More than 60,000 buildings were destroyed. In fact, so devastating was the attack that the Germans coined a new word to describe such an attack whenever they carried out an attack that was as particularly demoralizing and as devastating as the one on Coventry. They say that the target had been Coventrated. And one of the buildings that had been devastated was St. Michael's Cathedral, most of it anyway. Some of its walls are still standing, particularly the ones that are behind the main altar. But it's what's in front of the walls standing, the walls that were behind the main altar, and what's carved onto that wall that makes a lasting impression to anyone who visits. There are two enormous charred pieces of wood which fell from the ceiling of the cathedral when it was set on fire, and the townspeople formed them into the shape of a cross, much like, as you may remember, after 9/11 at the World Trade Center, there was those two steel girders in the shape of a cross that were photographed and on newspapers and all over the internet afterwards. And behind the cross, they carved two words in gold letters onto the wall, or the apse, behind the main altar. Now, what would you think the townspeople that survived this brutal attack that lasted not just for hours, but were targeted on multiple occasions as part of a plan that was carried out and whose aim it was not to just to devastate buildings, but was to, in fact, kill people? What do you think they chose to carve on those walls of their ruined cathedral? Father, forgive. Father, forgive. Not never forget, but Father, forgive. Last week we celebrated Divine Mercy Sunday, and this week we have Luke's telling of a similar event where the Lord walked into the midst of the disciples, in the midst of their fear and their shame, and brought peace and forgiveness. And at the heart of this gospel is what is etched on that wall of the bombed out cathedral. Father, forgive. Because much earlier, 1900 years before they were carved into stone, they were cried out by the voice of God who became man and hung on the cross. Hung on a cross on a Friday that we call good. Jesus cried out those words, Father, forgive. And as one of the saints commented, that not only did Jesus cry out those words, Father, forgive, he went on to make excuses. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That cry wasn't simply uttered for the Roman soldiers who tortured Jesus to death, Those words weren't uttered simply for the Jewish leaders who handed Jesus over to Pilate to be crucified. Those words weren't uttered just for the apostles who, all of them, save John, abandoned Jesus when he needed them most. Those words weren't uttered just for Judas, who for 30 pieces of silver betrayed his friend and Lord. Those words were uttered for me and my many sins, and for you, and for your many sins. Not the small sins that we have no problem talking about, but the big ones, the great ones that leave us ashamed. And the mere memory of them can make us think that we're just damaged forever. So then what are we supposed to do with that today? What are we supposed to do when we're confronted with all that? I would suggest that we take and make the time to thank God every day. How many of us really do that? To thank God, not just for the worldly or material things of this life, health, wealth, good relationships, as good as those things are. What else are we supposed to thank God for? For the fact that he is rich in mercy, and that he doesn't treat us according to our sins. That the fact that for us, by name, he has done all that he has done for us, culminating in Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection. So let's not take that for granted, as I know I can, for what it is that has happened for us, by name, on the cross.